Hey everyone, it's Ashley with National Quilter Circle, and welcome to this month's live and lives that are done with your kids because, as everyone knows, we're kind of all home with our families right now, home with our kids, and that's just kind of becoming a little bit of the norm for some social distancing and getting to work from home and stay at home. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about sewing and quilting with kids because while he's not normally always here with me during lives, anytime I'm doing quilting at my house, he's generally sitting right here. So I have some tips on sewing and quilting with younger kids, specifically this age. So he'll be 3 in a few days. And then also some tips and some projects and things that you can do as your kids get older, and maybe ways that you can get them into quilting and just fun little things that they can work on that sort of makes them want to get into your hobby with you. So with him, obviously I don't let him do anything with the rotary cutter or the iron. I don't want anything that's going to hurt him, obviously. He knows the iron is very, very hot. That's something that drilled into him from day one. So if you have young kids that are going to be in your quilting room with you, definitely make sure that you are still, what is safe and what is hot and what is sharp, but they don't obviously know that. So make sure you're definitely always being overly repetitive even with that to make sure that they know don't touch the iron and don't touch the rotary cutter. So anytime he goes towards the rotary cutter, I definitely make sure he knows not to touch it. I'm not as protective with the scissors, and there's a reason why. I don't ever let him cut with the scissors, but if he just picks them up and hands them to me, I don't overly freak out about that because I know he's going to go to school in a couple years, preschool, and he's going to see scissors. Obviously, those are kid-safe scissors, but I don't want to make him afraid of something that he's going to be using soon. So while there's some things I want him to avoid, I don't want to make him overly afraid of anything. So that's just sort of my basics for safety when you're doing any kind of quilting, when your kids are near you, or if you're trying to get them into quilting also. When you're actually doing a project, so if I was going to be working on just a simple little quilt, one with little squares that I'm putting together, anytime I am putting together multiple pieces, I'm usually always chain piecing, which means I have big stacks of things. So chain piecing is when you are doing one step 100 times before you move on to the next one. So that really helps streamline the process. So when I'm doing that, obviously there is more than the amount of fabric that I'm just working with. So there's big piles that I just have sitting here that I let him play with because it's not going to hurt anything. He's not going to mess up that fabric, and it's just keeping him busy. Little things like this where this is a little storage tool that holds all of my marking pens and pencils. Just little things that keep them busy in your sewing room that he's not going to hurt and it's not going to hurt him. These are great things that they can be playing with while you're trying to get some quilting done. Now, if they are of the age where they can start helping, they can be doing marking and pinning and things like that. So if I was making half square triangles and I'm having to mark the wrong side of a piece of fabric, I'm obviously going to have my ruler. So I'm going to use a smaller ruler here so I don't hit anybody in the face over here. But if you're marking, so if I'm sitting here marking with my marking pen or pencil, as I do this more and more often, he sees me doing it and he wants to start helping. So ways that you can let them do sort of the same thing that you're doing without letting them draw or scribble all over the back of your fabric would be to either give them a mechanical pencil with no lead, depending on their age. He's at the age where he knows how to use a mechanical pencil, so he'll tell me it's broken and it needs lead, so it doesn't quite fool him like I want it to. But there are things like a Hera marker. So this is a Hera marker, and it is a plastic tool, hard plastic, and it is meant for marking your fabric without actually using a marking pen or pencil. And you would use it just like you would a marking pen or pencil when you're marking your fabric. You go ahead and line it up against your ruler and just press kind of hard, and it makes a little indentation. So I prefer to use marking pens and pencils, but this is something that he could use or your kid could use if you don't actually want them drawing on the fabric. So you can see he has a small ruler, I have a larger ruler, and he's making little marks on the fabric. So if you have just a scrap piece of fabric, you can let them draw on it, or He has his little hair marker, and he knows he can go ahead and start trying to make indentation marks on the fabric. So anything that like lets them do sort of the same thing that you're doing, kind of just gets them into quilting and makes them want to start quilting. So it may not be actually the mark that I want, but you know, he's still having fun. When you're done, say, marking your fabric and you're moving on to the next step of pinning your fabric, this is still something that, depending on the age and your comfort level with your child, and knowing what they can or can't do, this is also something that you can let them help with. So, you're gonna put that back together. He's putting lead in the pencil. So little things here. We'll put the lead in the pencil. Good job. With pins, so I always have it's right here, a magnetic pin cushion rather than a regular pin cushion. And pins are something that he's actually been playing with for a few months now, and not in any way that's going to hurt him, but he does like to just sort of take them off and put them back on because they're magnetic. He knows they're pointy. He knows that they will poke him, and that they can hurt because he has done it, but he still is just careful when he does it. So things that I allow him to do with me would be, if I were pinning my fabric like this, I would, if he's not distracted with the pencil right now, have him hand me pins. So can you hand me a pin? You want to give me a pin? Or let him play and start to pin his own fabric. So again, anything that is going to let him do the same thing that you're doing is helpful. So I'm going to pin some of my pieces of fabric. We're pretending I'm just putting little squares together for an easy scrap project. So speaking of easy scrap projects, if you are looking for one, there is one that is going to start tomorrow with Colleen. She's going to do sort of a quilt along of a scrappy quilt project. So if you have a bunch of scraps and you have your own project, or you want to follow along with her and make that one, that's great. Or we have a free pattern download for you. That's actually the quilt that's behind me here on the little quilt ladder, and it's called Charming Strips. So it's made from strips, and I use charm packs for it. That's why it's called Charming Strips, but really just charm packs are 5-inch scraps of fabric. So a great scrap quilt project, and a great one that, again, you can have your kids help you with, because great thing about scraps is that you can put together pretty much any and all color combination that you want. So a great one to be able to let your kids pick out your fabric for you. So if you click on the banner, you'll be able to see the entire quilt laid out, as opposed to I just have one little piece here. But you can see it's all different colors. So again, if you're using like a charm pack, it's going to come with 40 to 42 different colors of fabric. But if you're using just your scraps, then that's a fun thing where you can have your... You broke the lid? Oh, it's okay. You can have your kids sort of pick the next color that's going to come up. So, you know, maybe they have their favorite color combination and they want to help out that way. So just a great, another project that you can be doing with kids. So this is why I told you, he knows how to use this mechanical pencil, so he'll know if it's out of lead or not. Huh? Here, we need to pin these. Can you hand me a pin? No? Okay, well, I'll get a pin. Anyway, so now I'm going to go ahead and pin my fabric, and that's going to be the next step that I'm doing for my sort of chain piecing, or doing all of my steps in increments where I'm, hey, cutting first, don't do that. Cutting first, then marking, and then pinning, and then we'll move to sewing. Yeah. You need to use this. No. You want to use this? This, however, is the part of working with your kids that is going to be more difficult. So if you are someone who has never done any kind of quilting with your kids in your quilting room with you, you definitely have to have more patience than you would think you'd have to have. So he is going to really slow down your progress of your project that you're getting done, and that's okay. And that might be something that's hard for you during this time, knowing that you have, you know, either one small child with you or multiple children running around while you're trying to quilt. Just like I said, giving them things to sort of keep them busy definitely helps out. And if we weren't doing a live and I have, you know, a limited camera area here, I'd probably have his own little chair, and he also has his own little table that I set up in here with him sometimes, so he can be still in here with me, but separate from what I'm doing. I think that one's broken, out of lead, so you'll have to use this. So once we've done, say, your cutting, your marking, and you're ready to actually do some sewing, this is still an area where you can allow them to help you. And depending on his cooperation right now, we'll see if he does what he normally does. But while I am sewing, it's okay. While I'm sewing, because he usually likes to help me pin, and he likes to hand me a pin, and then I put it in, when I am actually sewing, I will sew up to a pin, because of course you never want to sew over your pins, and then he will take that pin out for me. So again, this is something, what do you gotta say? Where it's going to come down to how okay, we're back. I'm not sure what happened. I would like to blame it on him, but I don't think he had anything to do with it. But so anyway, so if you're actually going to get into the sewing part, which he might have lost interest in it at this point, but if you are able to have them sit with you, and again, you can sew up to a pin and have them remove a pin for you. That's something that's a super easy way to get them involved. Again, it's going to make your quilting and piecing process way slower than you've probably ever quilted before, but that's just something that's going to be sort of expected with the territory of quilting with young kids. So that is sort of how I go about quilting with my almost 3-year-old. How I keep him busy. If I want to get some stuff done by myself, I keep him occupied with things over here. Or if I actually want him to be helping me, again, I'm letting him hand me pins. I am letting him pull pins out as I sew up to him, and just sort of getting him into the quilting process, because he is definitely sort of grown up in my sewing and quilting room, and he is no stranger to everything sewing and quilting related. So that is sort of what you would do with a kid his age. Now, if you are somebody who has older children who are home right now because schools are closed, and again, they want to be getting involved because they see what you're doing, or you just think it's a great time to start teaching them how to quilt, there are a bunch of great things that you can do with them. Easy projects, pretty much all the same basics that he was just doing, helping, only actually letting them do it. So if you've already cut out your squares, again, if you have an older kid, maybe 6, 7, 8 years old, they can definitely be doing the marking on your fabric. So make sure you're giving them pieces of fabric and materials that are better to sort of their size. So I wouldn't be handing them this big giant ruler just because it's going to be hard for them to sort of work with and work around. So smaller version. So this one is a 3.5 by 12.5. So that's a great one to be letting them use, or any of the smaller square rulers. Again, smaller hands need smaller rulers. It just makes it a little bit easier, but then they can actually be doing the marking for you. They can be doing the pinning for you, and even the sewing. So while you may want to still be the one in control of the presser foot, there's nothing that says they can't help you guide that fabric as you're going, and again, removing those pins as you're going. I mentioned this Charming Strips quilt pattern that, again, Colleen's going to be starting the Scrap Along, Quilt Along tomorrow, that you can be joining her for. Again, this is a great, easy, good beginner project, using up those scraps, letting them pick out colors, letting them help prep and put together the stacks of things. That's really great too. If you don't have necessarily a project in mind, but you're still wanting to get your kids used to a sewing machine, getting them sort of practicing, but maybe you don't have a big stash of fabric and you don't have necessarily a bunch of fabric that you want to let them, I hate to say ruin, but they might if they're just sort of, marking on it haphazardly or sewing random lines of stitching. One thing that you can do that's actually really helpful in terms of getting them comfortable with the motion of sewing and piecing, which would be going in straight lines, leaving your needle down, pivoting, things like that. If you have, say, a workbook, a school workbook that has a maze or something in it, or you can, do a Google image search of just free printable, easy mazes, that's a fun thing to let kids sew on. So you can sew through paper, leave on whatever needle you just used for your past project that probably is going dull anyway, so sewing through paper is not going to hurt it. You can either leave thread in your machine or not even have any thread in your machine, or top or in the bobbin, and then just let them sew their way through the maze. So that's going to be teaching them how to line up that presser foot on one line of the maze or somewhere along that, depending on how wide the little stream of the maze is. And that's going to be teaching them how to stop with the needle down, pivot around corners, just sort of some of the basics motions of piecing and of sewing and quilting. So it won't use up any fabric, doesn't have to use any thread, can use an old needle, and is perfectly safe for them to be doing, again, depending on their age. Hi, Linda. You have your children have their hands on top of mine while sewing. Yes, then the machine would magically stop. So that's a great idea too. So if you want them to sort of, again, get into the motion of quilting, if your hands are right here on the machine, have their hands on top of your hands. Obviously their hands are a lot smaller, so they can be further back and you don't have to worry about, you know, danger of the machine or needle or anything like that. But really just making sure you're not taking anything for granted in terms of their safety is going to be very important when you're getting young kids into sewing, because they don't necessarily know what it is that can hurt them. So mazes, a great way for them to practice simple projects. This quilt behind us, we have a bunch of other great simple projects that are on National Quilter Circle, lots of free blocks and just little things that can be made. Another fun thing that they can do that I don't personally do, because I'm a fan of cutting my fabric with a rotary cutter, and I love super straight, perfect lines, but we have other instructors on National Quilter Circle. Heather Thomas is one of them, who she loves to tear her fabric. So if you are using your regular cotton fabric, it is very common to make a little snip in the fabric and then tear it. That's one way that you can do all of your, I guess, cutting, if you will, of your fabric, or that's a really great way to find a really true straight of grain on your fabric, because when you're tearing it, when you make the little snip in your fabric, no matter where you make that little snip, once you tear it, it automatically tears right on that straight of grain. Let me make my snip here a little bit bigger, right, like so. Depending on how tightly woven your fabric is, you might have some little frayed edges that you need to trim away. But again, tearing will get you on the straight of grain and is still a way that you can, you know, prepare your pieces if you want. So if you have somebody who is strong enough to tear the fabric, I tried this out with my 3-year-old a little bit earlier, and he wasn't quite strong enough to be able to tear the fabric. But if your child is older and maybe wants to do that, they can tear the fabric for you. We even have other projects on National Quilter Circle where tearing the fabric and then purposefully fraying the edges is something that's used in the projects. So that could be another way to sort of add some fun interest to projects as well. Speaking of interest in projects, that is definitely one way to make sure that your kids are, I guess, wanting to sew and you're not like forcing them to do it, is to make a project that they are interested in. So maybe they're not necessarily interested in a big quilt for their bed because they already have one, or they're just not in the mood for a big project like that. If you can make something that you can finish relatively quickly so they can sort of see start to finish, hey, we finished this project and now I get to use it or play with it, that's going to help make them want to continue working with you or learning how to quilt. So something small, maybe it's a placemat that they can then use under their table for dinner that night, or it's something that you then take and put onto a little bag if you're into making bags that they can use and have part of it and be like, hey, I made this part of it. So keeping them interested in it by somehow incorporating something that they want to use when they're done is a great way to make them want to still do some sewing and quilting with you. Hi, Jenna. So you had fake embroidery projects when you were younger. How could I incorporate this with my kids and quilts? Yes. So I'm just picturing fake embroidery projects. I'm not sure that we're going to be on the same page with them, but they do even make these sort of their kits. And so they can either be wooden or plastic. So I'm picturing two different things. So one of them would be the plastic that's the really spaced out, open sort of weave designs. And you can use a big darning needle and yarn or something like that and actually weave it through and make your own embroidery. And that is safe because those darning needles, make sure you're getting one, maybe not a darning needle, needles that have a blunt tip. So they make blunt tip needles that are specifically for going through things that already have those pre-punctured holes, and using that and yarn, that's obviously very safe for a younger kid, and they could sit there and sort of make up their own design. There's also, and I'm blanking on what they're called, and I'm going to have to Google it and then post it into the comments, but you can order them. I know I've seen them on Amazon, and they're like little wooden shapes, and they have little perforated holes all the way around the outside edge, and you can practice doing like blanket stitches or just weaving in and out. And they're, again, fun shapes that kids would want to do. They come with the blunt tip needle, and they come with some sort of yarn or string or something like that, that you can allow them to work with. So that would be how I would incorporate that into working with your kids. In terms of putting it into a quilt, so I don't want to put wood in my quilt, and I probably don't want to put that plastic in my quilt either, but if your kid is older, then you could let them use a sharper needle and maybe do some of the stitching if you're comfortable with that. Otherwise, what I would recommend doing, and what I could do even with my son, who I don't know if you can see over here, rulers, big long rulers make really good racetracks for little cars. So that's what he's doing right now. But what I could do with him is, if I wanted to incorporate some kind of embroidery into my quilt, and it's something that I wanted him to have a part in, then I would probably take whatever piece of fabric or square that I'm wanting to put my embroidery on, and then I would give him either probably a heat removable marker, some kind of removable marking pen or pencil, and let him draw whatever shape or picture or whatever he wanted, and then I would then take and embroider that or stitch that. So it's still his drawing, and like he got to add a part onto the project, but I did the actual stitching. That way, you know, if you want to be using your sharp needle and your actual embroidery thread and things like that, you could do that. So that would be how I would actually incorporate it into the quilt. But if you're just wanting to sort of get your kids into don't push those buttons, into doing some stitching, then I would use the wood, or again, those sort of big plastic mesh sheets, and just let them kind of do some random stitching in and out. But yes, if you have a bunch of rulers like I have here of all shapes and sizes, they do make great racetracks. You can sort of set one up around your sewing room, and that will keep them occupied for a while as well. So just other fun ideas, things that you can be doing with your kids. Again, I know it's a different time right now with everybody sort of being home with their kids and maybe trying to get some work and stuff done with people that may not have been around with them before. Again, a little bit unpredictable at times, but I think you're going to find that if you are able to even take, 20 minutes, we've been maybe 20 minutes, and he's kind of already lost interest in it. But if you get that 5 to 10 minutes with him where he's actually sitting there doing quilting with you, helping you pin, helping you mark, things like that, I think you're gonna remember that part and have more fun with that part later on. And little things like this maybe won't bother you or frustrate you when you're trying to get your projects done. So have fun with your kids in your quilting room. Get them involved in any way you can. Again, in any way that I've mentioned, or fun, easy projects we have on National Quilter Circle. Sign up and do this scrappy quilt along with Colleen that starts tomorrow. It's going to go for 4 weeks. And just kind of have fun quilting with your family for however long we all have to practice social distancing and possible quarantining, and just have fun in your quilting room. So hopefully this gives you some ideas and things to do with your kids, and have fun the rest of this time.